So in the inventory, we have three things that seem to imply a fourth. Why don't I exist? The top spot is the voice glottal fricative. And by far, cool. Yeah, they're marked. They're marked. However you want to interpret that statement. And I know there are many ways. All right, so what else do we have? Hello, YouTube. It is very hot today. If you watch this in the future, you may think back to what kind of a day July 19th, 2022 was where you were in the world. Maybe it was lovely weather. I don't know. But for a lot of people, including a lot of people in the audience and the presenter, it is not. So let's beat the heat and do some linguistics. Let's research. We are talking about a typology of consonant inventory gaps. Nikolaev 2022, a paper, and we are sort of learning to read linguistics papers as we go. So off to the side. Hope I don't get canceled for my views on typology. I don't know, it could happen. All right, so we've looked at this. This paper is called Typology of Consonant Inventory Gaps. And we've come to it with this idea of what does it mean for a consonant inventory to be naturalistic. This is the abstract, where it tells us its sort of goals. And we've taken out from these from the abstract some questions that we have some interest in, or some topics. So one, a formal definition of a phonological inventory gap. This may or may not be interesting to us, depending on what it ends up being. I think the goal here is to get something that can be sort of operationalized rather than an intuitive notion of a gap. So it's always necessary before embarking on any kind of research to get a definition that you can actually latch onto and not be able to quibble about. So if you define it specifically, that gets rid of your wiggle room, right? You can't say, oh no, but I meant it like this, and you have to make it nice and precise and crisp along the edges so people can argue against it or for it. So that's why we have this. Then I think this is going to be where we really are having fun. Types of consonant inventory gaps, and then the relationships between gaps and inventory size, and the relationships between gaps and sound change, the relationship between gaps and segment borrowing. So do languages seek to fill gaps in the inventory in the course of sound change or in the course of borrowing? That is it. Okay, so moving on. So last time we looked at the intro, and now we can take a look at this related work. We're probably not going to spend time on here because that's not our goal today. Just a lot of, what did people do in the past on this question? And you can see the author try to group people into people pursuing the same kind of line of questioning, people who disagree with each other. Usually, it's common to set up maybe 2 or 3 main approaches and then classify the previous work into that. So that's fun, but we don't really care about that today. Defining and identifying gaps. So, formalized definition of 2 kinds of inventory gaps. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to limit our data set to include place of articulation, manner of articulation, and voice onset time. Okay, so right away to make this a tractable question, we have to zoom in a bit. So we're talking about place, manner, and VOT. So this is going to be things like, voiced versus voiceless versus aspirated. Place, obviously things like labial, coronal, dorsal, and maybe some more specific distinctions within those. Manner, stops, fricatives, affricates. The author specifically says place of articulation is unrestricted, so presumably we have more than just these 3. We might have velar, uvular, etc. But manner of articulation is only voiceless and voice stops, fricatives, and affricates. Okay, so we're not going to be doing aspirated as well. And we'll see what kind of places are distinguished. Blah, blah, blah. If I say blah, 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 by the way, it's not because I don't think it's valuable, but, just I'm trying to move on our, if the author of this paper comes and watches this video, welcome. This is awesome. There's no disrespect intended by saying blah, blah, blah. All right. Gap generating triplets. Gap generating triplet is a triplet of consonants such that two pairs of consonants from it are featural minimal pairs with respect to two different features, and the members of the third pair differ in the values of both of those features. Interesting. Okay, so this is an attempt to formalize this idea of a gap being implied by other consonants existing in the inventory. So let's take the example that the author gives, B, D, Z. So let's see what we can do here. So B, D, Z, so I'm going to make a little table. Voiceless, voice. This is not going to be a standard inventory table, but markdown table is always fun. I don't have, there we go. All right. So we have then labial. I used to have in my main vault, I have a plugin that does this for me. It makes the tables nice. I won't subject you to much of this, but I want to explain this. Okay, so we have my beautiful table here. Beautiful table here, and we have what? We have a voiced labial. We have a voiced coronal. Oh no. What am I doing? It's not voiceless and voiced. They're all voiced. Okay, so then we have labial coronal here, and we have stop fricative here. This is more familiar looking. All right. So we have this, and now we have labial stop, coronal stop, labial coronal fricative. So notice that we have two sort of oppositions here, the place and the manner, and we have a gap. So this is a definition that tries to formalize what it means for something to be a gap. Oh, Logan, you know this paper, the triplet paper? Gap generating triplets. Okay, so that's why we have this concept of a gap generating triplet. So in the inventory, we have three things that seem to imply a fourth. Why don't I exist? So in order to construct or identify gap generating triplets, GGTs, it is necessary to fix the value of one of the three selected features. When one fixes the manner of articulation, one obtains within manner, GGTs. When one fixes the VOT, one obtains between manner, GGTs. Okay, so for example, BDZ is a between manner GGT on voiced stops and fricatives, and PTD is a within manner GGT on stops. Okay, I think we have to understand this terminology. It's not super self-explanatory. So when you fix the manner of articulation, so within manner GGTs, fixed manner, varying place and VOT, between manner GGTs, fixed VOT, varying place and manner. Right. Okay, so this then is a between manner GGT because it fixes the voice onset time. We're only talking about voiced segments. Interesting. Okay. And PTD, patada, is a within manner GGT on stops. Right. Because we are fixing the manner and varying the place and voice onset time. Okay, I get it. Chat, do you get it? I think that's cool. Any such triplet implies the potential existence of the fourth consonant that will close the square. Close the square. Great, okay. Okay, and this is how the analysis was done. Great, we don't really worry about that. Here, a consonant inventory has a gap if there's a segment that can be associated with at least one GGT. Okay, that's fairly self-explanatory. That follows. Cool. Okay, now we have an idea of direct and inverse gaps. Given the tendency for stops to be found at more places of articulation than fricatives in any given language, okay, let's write these down. So, more stops than fricatives these are tendencies. More contrast in place for stops than fricatives. This is you might call a universal. There's more contrast in place for stops than fricatives. There's more contrast in place for fricatives than affricates. And keep in mind that when we say universal in typology, it's not necessarily actually universal. It's often just a tendency. Okay. I call the gaps where the missing segment belongs to a less typologically diverse class direct gaps. And the gaps where it begins to a more diverse class, inverse gaps. Oh no, linguistics terminology is gonna get us. Okay, so we have we have more place contrasts in stops than fricatives than affricates. Number of contrasts of place contrasts. If the gap is, okay, this only applies for between manner gaps like this one. If the gap is in the less diverse class, so between stops and fricatives are there are fewer of them. There tend to be fewer of them, fewer distinctions. So this would be a direct gap because the gap is in the fricative, and that typically is what you would, if you expect it to be anywhere, you'd expect it to be there. An inverse gap would be if we had, what should that be? Something like this, or sorry, V, and then we have nothing here. This would be an inverse gap. Okay, great. So let's write this down. Direct gap, gap in the manner that typically has fewer contrasts, place contrasts. Inverse gap, gap in the manner that typically has more place contrasts. Interesting. Okay. So this is only for between manner gaps. All right. Okay, here's the analysis. Here's the data. Good stuff. So this is interesting. This is interesting. The sample we have divided into macro areas. These are kind of consonant. I have consonants on the brain. Continent-sized areas. So we have Africa, Australasia, Eurasia, North America, Papunesia, South America, and no data. So they've given not one of the traditional continents here, but they've given the sort of island-filled area in the South Pacific, I guess. So the idea is between Australasia and Asia, that realm, its own area. Then we see the breakdown by family. Okay, cool. This is cool if you're interested in the sort of empirical base of this research. But let's just assume that it's good to go. And what else do we have? Okay, so we have within manner gaps. Right. So this is actually, don't have to worry about this too much. Well, let's leave it in and I'll just say gap generating triplets. We put this in our types of consonant inventory gaps. So we have direct gaps, inverse gaps. We have within manner and between manner. That's cool. Okay, then what do we have for the stops? So within manner, stop gaps. Within manner. So let's look at stops first. Stops. Within manner stop gaps. Oh, you see some interesting patterns here, don't you? The most common is G, and then the next most common is P. So with the voiced, you get the gap most frequently occurring in the dorsal place of articulation, but with the voiceless, you get it most frequently occurring at the labial place of articulation. And there are good phonetic reasons for that. Yeah, same goes for the uvular voiced. So, and then what else do we have? After the these first two, which are over 100, then the next most common tier is the uvular, which definitely has some phonetic basis, but then the d and b, which is next. And that, the author points out, doesn't seem to have any articulatory or auditory reason for these segment to be absent. So that's interesting. The voiceless bilabial stop is a frequent gap, but it's often found in particular areas, and no North American or Australian language has a gap for P. So strong areal effects for P. Let's say phonetic basis. The uvular G has a phonetic basis, but D and B are somewhat mysterious. What else do we have? Yeah, Logan, I think that's a pretty good explanation, is that voice things are marked for obstruents, and so there you go. If you're going to have the voiced ones marked, then you expect D and B here. It's interesting. We have the palatal stops quite high up here, and the author discusses the tendency of these stops to become affricates. So, oh, that's nice. It goes right to the citations. Okay, so then we have the next most common are these. The unstable tend to become affricates. Cool. And then there's some more things. All right. Then let's talk about fricatives. The top spot is the voiced glottal fricative. And by far. Cool. And actually, the author points out that the whole top 5 of the gaps for fricatives are voiced. So this comes back to what Logan just said, which is that voicing is generally, for obstruents, I'll add, harder, or at least more marked, or there's some additional, they're less common, they're marked. They're marked, however you want to interpret that statement. And I know there are many ways. All right, so what else do we have? We have that in the top spot. We have je, ze, ve, re in the next. All voiced. And then the next is ch. And that seems, let's see what this says. The situation here seems to be the mirror image of the that of palatal stops described above. A diachronic interpretation suggests itself. Suggests. I love, this is a great academic phrase. Things suggest themselves. While palatal stops tend to become affricates, velar stops tend to lenite to fricatives. Why does that interpretation suggest itself? If ch is the most common gap, am I missing something here? The fact that velar stops tend to lenite to fricatives doesn't suggest that would be a gap, does it? It suggests it would be more common. Question. I don't know if I'm on board with this this self-suggesting interpretation. By the way, I write like that too, so it is how it is. All right, affricates. Thomas writes, because it's a gap, because presumably ch is a gap, k is more likely to fill it. But wouldn't that cause the gap to be in the stops, not the fricatives? It just doesn't seem to follow for me. Because it's a gap, because like whether k changes to ch, whether k changes to ch, and whether there's a gap in ch are not a priori related. The way that there would be a relationship is if a sound like the palatal stops were just had such a strong tendency to change and never to stay in their position, that's why you would see a gap there, because sounds never stay there for long. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious. I'd have to read more. In particular, the citation that they give. Anyway, affricates. Within manner, affricate gaps are infrequent. Not a lot of gapping going on in the affricates. So it should be pointed out that this is all within manner. So within manner gaps, we have ones for stops, we have ones for fricatives. For affricates, not common. Yeah, it is hard to visualize these gaps. Hopefully we will see some visualizations soon. Okay, let's see if we do. Anything? Can you give us anything? Okay, well that's a visualization. That's kind of interesting. All right, well, we'll get to that, I guess. Between manner gaps. Between manner gaps. Gauss. Thank you, Thomas. Okay. I was told, by the way, that the waveform of me saying is very recognizable, and it's so very easy to chop out. I wonder if I'll have to keep saying exactly the same way so that it doesn't give Lucy any trouble in the editing. Between manner gaps. Operationalized as a situation when an inventory lacks a voiced or voiceless stop. Okay, so we're just repeating our definition. Whereas between manner. So we're missing one of the voiced voiceless pairs in one place of articulation, in one manner of articulation, when another place of articulation has the full pair. Okay, so that's like this. Let's see if there's anything else we need to learn here. Some weirdness with... Okay, let me take a second to read this. There's just a fact that there aren't as many fricative places of articulation. Oh, no, wait, that's the other way around. There just aren't as many places of articulation for stops. So there are no labiodental stops, there are no interdental stops, there are no pharyngeal stops. But there are fricatives at each of those places of articulation. So this is actually going to give us some inverse gaps, but the author's not very interested in them because it makes sense, right? If you can't make a stop there physiologically, articulatorily, you can't do it. So it's not super interesting other than just that kind of bare fact that, yeah, you can't make an interdental stop. I don't know. Anyway, where are we going with this? Let's take a look at these gaps, direct gaps. Some of the fricatives can only be within manner gaps because they do not have a corresponding stop. Yeah, so this is the stuff that we talked about before. So there are no stops. There's no voiced glottal stop, for instance. There are no interdental stops. So that's fine. That I don't think is that interesting for us. And there are some fricatives that are only between manner gaps. Oh, and these are kind of interesting. So a pre-nasalized voiced velar fricative, a pre-nasalized voiced palatal fricative. So the first, they're not sorted by frequency, but that's interesting. All right, so let's see. These are all fairly rare. Oh, I'm starting to fade from the heat. I'm going to have to take a break soon. Just finish this little section. So we have these fairly rare, exclusively between manner fricative gaps. So nr, between manner. So let's say fricative gaps found exclusively between manner are rare. Most common is this nr. Nr. I don't even know. I've never heard that before. Does anyone know where that, what language would have that? Okay, what else? Between manner fricative gaps. Okay, so then we have a bunch that are also found as within manner gaps. Of those between manner gaps found also within manner, the vastly most common one is ch. And it's actually interesting because it's found as a between manner gap much more frequently than it's found as a within manner gap. What does that mean? We have to come back to this terminology. This terminology is a bit tough for me. I don't know about you. So ch is more commonly found as a between manner gap, right? Yeah, as more frequently found as a between manner gap than a within manner gap. What does that mean? So it's more likely, okay, brain is breaking. It's more likely that it is found that ch is missing when you have, so what would be the gap generating triplet for this? So it would be k, g, r, but no ch. So this would be the between manner, right? Between manner fixed. Oh, no, wait. This is the within manner. Within manner gaps, fixed manner, varying place and voice onset time. No, wait. Okay, I can't do this right now. I am overheating. So I'm going to take a break. YouTube, yeah, stay cool. We will see you in the next segment. I'll be right back.